we're sharing this panel with an award winner, Renee. She was awarded an award this morning that we all here know that. So congratulations, Renee.
Thank you so
Congrats.
much. I really appreciate that. Thank you.
Yeah, so I guess we'll get started. I think the order is JD and I, and then Stuart and Michael, and then Renee. Is that okay? So I'm going.
Do you want me to do a little timekeeping for you?
Yeah.
What do we have about, because we have, help me out, we have until 2:30, 1:15 to 2:30.
Yeah.
So if we do about 15 minutes
Perfect.
each, and then 15 minutes discussion.
Perfect.
Perfect.
Okay. Mhm. There we go. Okay. Okay, so I'll stand up. Hi. I'm Michelle Ciccone. I am a PhD student in the Department of Communication at the University of Massachusetts Amherst. And my co-presenter is a classmate, although very soon to be completely done with his program, moving on to great things, JD. So I'll turn it over to you, JD.
Hi there. Yeah, we'll just keep it simple and say I'm a PhD student for the time being. Yes, hello everyone. So what Michelle and I want to do, I guess I get to say next slide, which should be fun to you, Michelle, is talk about a project that's very much in progress. And that's why we wanted to bring it to this conference, to this panel, to really get some feedback from y'all about, how to best proceed. So what we want to go through today is just kind of frame this area of interest, what we're kind of talking about in terms of our approach to these issues of privacy and surveillance online. Talk about some of the literature that informs it, get into our research question, what we're hoping to contribute with this project, talk about kind of the research plan as we have it right now. And then I think most importantly for both of us is to kind of speculate what we're hoping to find and get into those open questions as we proceed with this research in the coming semester. So let's go ahead and go forward, Michelle, and maybe a little fast there. So again, issues of online surveillance, data tracking are what interests us, and the discourse around these typically surround social media platforms, Facebook, Twitter, TikTok, etc., or big governments, be it the Great Firewall or the NSA or even Google, any sort of platform like that. And within EdTech, there is more specific focus on what we're interested in, which is more learning management systems. So how these platforms are often using the same sort of data tracking and often, privacy, I guess, don't have the right word for it, loose privacy standards as a lot of the social media companies, how these are now implemented through learning management platforms. So our research kind of picks up there, and we look into, go to the next slide, these major learning management systems, Moodle, Blackboard, and Canvas. And what we're interested in is building on that existing research and adding a perspective we think has been missing, which is the student perspective. And in our case, the undergraduate student perspective. So how do they perceive these issues of privacy, of surveillance in regards to these these learning platforms? And within that larger question, what we're interested first in, do they suss out a difference between, say, privacy on a platform like TikTok or YouTube versus what they encounter, what they have to use on Blackboard or Canvas? Do they think about that in a different way? What are some of their experiences on these platforms? Something that I think definitely we felt is missing, not just kind of speculating on what it's like, but how has it been, especially post-pandemic or still pandemic, in a very online classroom world? How have they been feeling these issues of privacy through their use of these platforms? And finally, pooling all that experience, that perspective together to inform both how we as media literacy educators talk about issues of privacy and surveillance and don't leave out learning management systems, and also how we use these systems ourselves as instructors, how that can inform our decision-making going forward. So to get a little bit into our literature here and kind of just talk about why this matters, maybe a rhetorical, maybe an unnecessary question from the Media Literacy Conference. However, we'll make a case anyway. First, learning management systems in particular are now completely ubiquitous. I've got this stat from 2020. 99% of American colleges and universities use a learning management system. I'm sure that's 99.998 at this point. We're online. We use these systems. And the next level of it is that they increasingly handle so much of what happens in the classroom. So these means of surveillance, these tracking technologies are such a huge part of how learning management systems mediate the classroom. So we'll go to the next slide and kind of see what this looks like in practice. And that's that platforms like Blackboard, Moodle, they're upfront about this too. When we talk about privacy issues with, with Google or with some of these others, often it's kind of in the background, it's shadowy. This is the way these companies sell themselves, right? As they're tracking technology. If you go to that previous slide real quick, Michelle.
Oh, sorry.
Keep going. Yeah, I mean, we could see in the language, it's very corporatese, but still, these systems identify and overcome barriers to student success, tracking, keeping learners on track, optimizing institutional outcomes. And in practice, this is functions like, if we go to the next slide, things like Turnitin, or in this case, Safe Assign, right? Which does, textually analyzes every word students turn in to see if they're plagiarizing work. Next slide. It also means things like the performance dashboard, which is a common part of any of these learning management systems, to say, when did they last log in? How long were they in? What device did they log in? All of this data, to the next slide, informs things like predictive technologies, which are a huge new move in learning management systems to try to kind of track how students are doing. And finally, and I think maybe scariest for us is, I think it's this last one. Yeah, and the fact that this data is not protected. I mean, going through Blackboard's privacy statement, they say up front, right, that they'll sell this stuff to third parties, to other, it's right there. So going to the next slide, these issues of FERPA violations, of COPPA, these are getting really, really complicated, that students have to use this setup. And yet the issues of privacy are being sent out to a third party for-profit developer. Michelle, if you want to take over from here.
Yeah. So continuing to set up why we're interested in this research question of what students understand about these ed tech, these tools, and thinking about the context of ed tech used within schools. This idea of context is really important when you think about privacy. Research from Helen Niesenbaum makes clear that we understand privacy as being contextual. It's not that a single piece of information is private in all contexts. We want some people to know some things sometimes and we want other people not to know that. So privacy is always understood contextually. And on the internet, it's hard to control those contexts of who has access to what information. So like Dana Boyd and Alice Marwick introduced the idea of context collapse when we release a certain piece of information to online networks that travel beyond the context that we intended. That is felt to be a privacy violation, and what they've identified as what's called context collapse. So this idea of how students understand privacy in the context of schools is super important. And research from researchers in the UK interviewed primary and secondary age students, trying to understand how they understand privacy within certain contexts. And they find that young people, kids, because they've first experienced digital privacy within an interpersonal relationship, like I trust my friend, so I'm going to trust that they're not going to screenshot what I sent them and send it to someone else. That because that's their first experience with conceptions of privacy, they apply that to institutional context and commercial context, and so that gets really complicated when your school is not your friend. What does it mean to trust your school with the information that is being collected, especially when there isn't really authentic choice in school settings, like what kinds of ed tech is in use. And the research that says that understandings or assumptions about privacy of information, or how data is used with commercial technologies like TikTok or social media. Students do not necessarily transfer those ideas to school settings. So the Project Information Literacy is a really cool group. They put out some report, the Algorithmic Literacy Report, I think it's called, and they interviewed a bunch of undergraduate students. And they found that even though undergrads were pretty savvy and understanding like how algorithms work and personalization of a newsfeed and all that, they reported to not quite understand that the LMS Canvas in this case, for instance, uses the same data practices. So this idea of context is super important in our research. And then the final piece of establishing why we think it's important for us to be asking this research question is that the policies and practices that schools establish with students and establishing certain relationships between students and ed tech, it matters. Students develop a certain understanding of their expectations of privacy, their relationships to their data is partly informed by what happens to them in school. And so ideas like data illiteracy and the way that policies and practices within school, students' use of ed tech in schools can lead to a sense of naturalizing the routines of data collection. So not consulting with students and saying, or like making it a conversation about what tools are being used, what are the implications of that. Research says that students experience that as a sort of injustice to not include student voice in that conversation. So for these reasons, we think it's important to be looking at the set of research questions and to understand what undergraduate students really do think about the LMS and these practices. When we put this proposal in, the spring semester felt wide open to possibility. So this is forecasting what we want to do. So we are looking to conduct focus groups with undergraduate students, probably at UMass, my institution. And we're inspired by an idea of focus groups that are inspired by critical pedagogy, of Freirean ideas about co-constructing knowledge between researcher and participants, and thinking about how to construct a focus group where everyone in the room can sort of come to a new understanding together and maybe bring all of our assumptions together and understand what are some of like the questions or concerns that each as individuals we all have, and maybe coming to new understandings about the uses of LMSs in our education. So, so here are some focus group topics as we put together the questions that we want to engage students with. And some of these come from research and practice that JD and I have engaged in beyond this research. So for instance, visualization activities. I was a middle school teacher and I love to, I would start off my 8th grade curriculum with the question, draw a picture of the internet. And there was something about like making concrete and visual, something that's experienced as like ephemeral and very not material, can reveal certain assumptions, understandings, misunderstandings, or at least coming to like rooting a discussion about these really ephemeral ideas with something concrete. As we think about focus groups, I guess the main point is this not like an interview situation, but how to use creative methods to surface understanding. I don't know, JD, if we want to talk specifically about any of these things.
The next slide is when I want to hop in.
Yeah.
Yeah, because I'm going to close out and get these all up. Because yeah, these are what we're interested in, what we wanted to bring this, this research to this conference with these individuals, both digitally and physically here, is because we are still working through these issues. Michelle mentioned, we both, especially me, I come from critical pedagogy. I'm really interested in that co-construction, co-intentional knowledge. But, I know these are topics that are of interest to a lot of folks here. And I think maybe the opportunity to talk with students about these topics might be of interest to you all as well. So it'd be really interesting to hear, other things we may touch on that we didn't cover here. We are, really wanting those experiences, those viewpoints, those kind of day-to-day engagements with learning management systems, something I really want to know about. I'm on the other end of this thing, assigning things or reading papers about, evil data collection. I really want to know, how students are experiencing this. Thinking, and again, particularly our own use of these tools, and how to teach it, what resources could be interesting. And I think what we really want to do is kind of split the difference between these are, tech savvy students who know everything, and then these are gullible students who are giving away all their data. I think what we hope to find is something more nuanced and interesting in the middle. But these are some of the questions we've kind of have open right now. And yeah, would love to get some feedback as we kind of enter into the research stage of the process. I think that's all I have, Michelle.
Great. Okay, so I just got word from Karen that we'll take questions now.
I think while it's fresh, if there's some questions or some
Great.
comments on those open questions you have there, I think we should do just a few minutes of that right now.
Yeah.
Thanks for your presentation. Just a quick point of clarification. I'm sorry if I missed this. Do you know how much data is being collected by these these learning platforms now? Are they upfront about it, or is the concern that they're not?
I think there's concern.
Michelle, if you would paraphrase the question for us, just so we can hear. No offense to our speaker, but it's some wisdom.
No, thank you for that reminder. So the question was, do we know, do we have a good grasp of what information and data is collected by these LMSs, or is it speculation, or is that part of the inquiry to find out what is, right? Is that, okay. So, I mean, we can look at the policy documents from these technologies and see what they tell us, but I mean, I think that research says that those documents are not very transparent. And I think the thing with LMSs that's really interesting, and they're a great paper, including Ben Williamson, but there's a bunch of other co-authors. They looked at Google Classroom and looked at the Google Classroom API, which is that piece of code that allows you to connect your LMS to third-party apps. And that, so like as a teacher, you think, okay, I understand Google Classroom. You can read the Google Classroom terms of service and have an idea of like, okay, what does that mean that I'm using Google Classroom? And you maybe trust because you can integrate these third-party apps, that those third-party apps are held to the same policies as Google Classroom. But this research shows that that is not the case at all. And it's really murky in the terms of service and privacy policy, like what it means to integrate a third-party app. So I think that it's, I think that we can like develop shortcuts, or we can make assumptions about like what the data policies are. But the reality is that the idea is to like go out from the LMS pretty quickly and just like whatever happens, happens. So that's definitely part of what we want to understand, what students know about that, what they think about that. I don't know.
Yeah.
Stuart.
Yeah.
Maybe Stuart, then Natalie.
Okay. Excuse me. Thank you, Michelle and JD. That was fantastic. I'm really excited to see the work that comes out of your study. And as I was listening, it struck me, I wonder if you have any thoughts on the policy implications of student voices around learning management systems and what that might mean, or how you might focus that as part of the outcome of your work, because I think there's a powerful tactical potential there for students' concerns to do things that adult and even teacher-led concerns can't necessarily do in terms of grabbing public attention around the impact of LMSs.
Mm. That
If
is
I
something-
understand your question, yeah.
I just really, I'm wondering if you've thought of is there ways, do you have intentions to use this work as a way of engaging policy or regulation around LMSs in schools? Because that's where it seems to really have real potential impact.
Yeah, I think that's, I think right now most of our discussions are more on the level of instructors, right? So kind of choices to opt out, choices on what you implement, how discussions are framed. I think that's the natural next step though, right? Because that is just a localized application of these ideas where, yeah, I think as you're right to mention, Stuart, the real work is to regulate, what is right now, I think as we've read this research, a Wild West in terms of, reading through this policy, the privacy, but I mean, it's incredible what, how unprotected so much of this data is. So yes, I think that is the big picture goal, though I think our scope for the study right now, and Michelle, you may differ, is a little bit more narrow, which is kind of the educational, use value of these conversations.
No, I'll try to talk so they can hear me. So like I'm a first year grad student and I just realized like I didn't know my school uses Moodle. I did not know about this. So it's like kind of shocking to me. And she said like, is your study gonna look at like how much data they collect? As a student and my school uses Moodle, like can I get my data? Like can I go through Moodle and be like, hey, I want to know what you have on me? Like, would that be possible?
Did you hear that on the Zoom?
I think I heard it. A few other folks didn't know, if you wouldn't mind paraphrasing.
Yeah, so Natalie, you said? Natalie's a first year PhD student, and she found out recently that her school uses Moodle, and she's surprised by this and is curious, can she like petition Moodle or the school to understand what data they're collecting? I will say in the spring, I attended a webinar that was hosted by ProPublica the Markdown. Which is nonprofit investigative. And it was teaching students how to submit FOIA requests to schools. And I think it was mostly K-12, like to your school district, to get information about the contracts that your district has signed with an ed tech vendor. And there are successes of students successfully getting those FOIA requests fulfilled. So I think that it's possible. I think that it's hard. I think that your school has incentives to not want you to understand really. But I don't know, JD, if there's anything.
I would just say, Natalie, thank you so much for that, because I think that's important for how we're going to have to go into these conversations with it. Like, because I think a lot of folks, or a lot of the students we speak with are going to be like, I don't know anything about that, or like, wait, what are they doing? I think for me, I do kind of want to not have all the answers. I don't know how you feel about Michelle. I don't want to like lecture on data collection, and I do want to know where students are at and what they know already about this, because I think that's of value. But I don't know. I guess that's just a really. I'm thinking more of kind of the framing of the focus groups with that. But that's a really valuable perspective, Natalie, to kind of think. Yeah, I think that's what I suspect is going to happen. A lot of them are going to be like, oh wait, what are they? How would they use that? How would how would this be of issue? But I guess that's what we'll find out.
I see there are more hands, but we want to transition to the next presenter, so we can continue the conversation.
Write down your question.
Yeah, thank you all so much.
So much.
Michael and Stuart.
Okay, thank you so much, Michelle. I'm going to share my screen, and I hope everyone's able to see the PowerPoint that I now have on screen. Is that fair? Yeah. Thank you all. And so just to start off with some introductions, my name is Stuart Poyntz, and I'm a professor in the School of Communication at Simon Fraser University in Vancouver, and long been involved in media education, both as a participant designer, program designer, and researcher. I'm going to pass the baton over to Michael in just a moment, but By way of introduction, it's wonderful to be here, and I'm really sorry that we're not in person with you. Michael and I, my COVID experience is about 10 days old now when I wrote to Belina, who I'm so very grateful for allowing us to providing this means of participation. And then shortly after that, Michael got hit with what appears to be COVID. And so we're very sorry we're not with you, because seeing the social media posts about your gathering, it's precisely the kind of meetings that we want to be at these days and miss so much. Our talk is also an opportunity to share with you some research that's coming together in a revised chapter from our book, Media Literacy is a Critical Introduction. We're now in the midst of writing a second edition of this book. It's very much taken on media literacy education from the perspective of cultural studies, with a strong sense of the politics and the political space of what media education does. And so in the midst of a revision of that text for a second edition, algorithms are obviously really very central to the way our media system operates. And so in sharing with you our talk today, what Michael and I wanted to set up is really the framework we're developing for the new chapter on media literacies and algorithmic power. There are, as our talk will unfold, there are ways in which we're trying to make sense of how concepts in media education can be used to take on questions of algorithmic power. But there are also some really powerful complexities that questions of algorithms bring to the field of media education. And so where we want to wrap up today is by setting out four what we might call complexities, possibly even paradoxes, although we're not quite comfortable with that latter term. Certainly complexities that algorithm brings to the field of media education that reshapes our thinking about how the field operates and the central frameworks that are used for thinking about that. So I think that will lead into Renee's talk, I hope, in a really interesting way. And in that sense, it might be useful to have these talks back to back with the Q&A afterwards, but I'll leave that to Michelle to decide. So with that opening, Michael, I'll pass the baton over to yourself.
Great, thank you. I hope my microphone's working and my voice appears to be working. I do have this really intense cold. So Michael Hoechsmann, I'm a faculty member at Lakehead University. I'm the chair of an education program, a thriving teacher ed program, as well as a faculty member in that same education program. So we have to rush a little bit through some of what we're doing here, but we want to start just by putting some vocabulary on the table. So to distinguish a platform, you can think of the big ones, the Facebooks, the Googles, the Amazons, etc., from data. And data, I think it's nicely thought of as the digital footprint, but in Spanish they say huellas, but it's what you write, but it's also where you visit, right? It's all the likes, it's all the attention you pay. And then algorithms direct traffic. They're actually something, and we'll talk about that. That's what we're talking about today, what they are or what they aren't, etc. But it's important also to recognize that machine learning is something else, and that there's this recursive feedback that's immediate. So we now have these learning machines that adapt with us as we do what we do, right? And from that can lead into real world outcomes, or also online ones, but automated decision making. Who gets what and what circumstance. Coded Bias, the wonderful documentary on Netflix. There's a teacher talking at the end, and he's been winning all these awards. And then at one point he was recommended to be, let go because the algorithm chose that person. Anyway, Stuart, next slide.
Oh, sorry, Michael, thank you.
Right, so what are algorithms? The quote that gets tossed around a lot, it comes from a textbook in 1971 written by Harold Stone. Introduction to Computer Organization and Data Structures. It's just a set of rules that precisely define a sequence of operations. Others point out how it's predictive and it draws on the past to predict the future. James Bridle, in that very eloquent New Dark Age book, says it's history transformed into a mathematical equation that when solved will produce the future. But and Bridle also shows how these are the same kinds of principles were used in weather forecasting and also early computing. That the algorithm actually is sort of a meta concept of computing itself, like even developing computing. Next slide, please. And then what does it look like? So I did the screen grab from the Amazon page there, and I put on purpose Weapons of Math Destruction by Cathy O'Neil because it gives me an opportunity to reference that book. But really, Amazon is the first glimpse of what we're calling the Web 3.0, which is the semantic web, the web that does our thinking for us. Right. So I say, well, I'm interested in this thing. And they say, well, then you might be interested in those two other things. Or people like you that chose that one also like this other thing. And it starts to give us this sense of a greater intricacy that we are interrelated, that the way we think is interrelated with how others think, and that these algorithms can improve how we think. And frankly, my taste in music has improved, and I've recovered from a dinosaur rock addiction, and I've learned a lot. So there is this good side, but there's also some difficult things that happen as well, very negative. So the other part is that we're kind of taught, and this is what Cathy O'Neil says, to assume that this is way too complicated for us. You can't understand this stuff, right? So it's opaque, taken for granted, we're not understood. And I love that naturalization of data collection that JD and Michelle, by the way, bang up presentation, that was great. It's the realm of experts, too complex. And then just to sort of, to insult to injury, this is Google's images of its major algorithm upgrades over the last 10 years. And, you see these images that look, cartoonish or something. And if you do look at a more detailed explanation, you'll see there's, 3 or 4 little bullet points attached to each one, but that's seen as enough. Panda got rid of spam, and Fred, low content sites, but this is how it's presented to us. So Stuart,
Thank you.
Over to you.
Okay, as Michael said, I think coming to a media education conference and talking about what algorithms are is to bring us all really to a common language. And the opaqueness of algorithms is certainly something we're all very familiar with. But I think it's also fair to say that the way we think about and introduce the work of algorithms to our students and to those people we work with in media education really benefits from thinking about algorithms as a system of visibility, as really certain kinds of regimes of visibility that act as sorting systems. They shape how we are visible and in fact invisible to the worlds, the networks, the social relationships that are around us. In this way, in the way that algorithms make our interests, our identities, our relationships visible to us, and in fact foist versions of those relationships onto us, algorithms also create what we might call what the researcher Tana Bucher calls an algorithmic imaginary. And really what she's getting at there is that in our everyday lives, we come to understand the algorithms through their operation, through their use, and through the way that they integrate and don't integrate into our lives. And that sense of both working on us and the way in which algorithms in making us visible work on us and sometimes fail, often fail. In fact, something we're going to pull out in a moment as our presentation unfolds is that the failure of algorithms may be an absolutely key tactical moment where the work of media education begins. Because there is a sense in which we live in a time where the power and the fetishizing of algorithms as ubiquitous, all-embracing kinds of systems prevents us from seeing how it is that we come to understand and calibrate their use in our daily lives, and in fact open up a space of critique. It's very clear that in the way algorithms make things seeable in the world, and when I say make things seeable, I mean that in the broadest terms. Not only do algorithms make ourselves seeable, but they make versions of ourselves as health subjects, as education subjects, as economic laboring subjects, all possible and visible. And so in this way, search engines will feign, and I think we're moving past this, but there has been a tendency to present search engines as not political or non-political in the way that they frame what is seeable and not seeable to us. This seems more and more absurd, particularly when we come to see the work of people like Safiya Noble, who I think her work on algorithms of oppression have really framed for us how visibility operates differentially through the work of algorithms. And when we say that visibility operates differentially, really quite simply what we're getting at is that algorithms represent communities and demographics in specific sorts of ways that are related by their difference. I think this is really evident in the work of Sophia Noble, as well as others who in Canada have looked at, for instance, the representation of Indigenous people and how search for Indigenous young people operates in highly scripted and configuring ways. If we dig into, and some of you will know this work quite well, but if we dig into how algorithms, and particularly social media algorithms, by which we want to point to Google PageRank and Facebook EdgeRank, how they operate to produce differences through their systems of citation, classification, and the impact that has on our search for reality. Very simply, the ability of Google, Facebook, and other algorithms to gather our data allows those same algorithms to recalibrate that data into advertising logics. That's what Google AdWorks is all about. It allows the data collection system to translate data into a particular market-centered principle. This market-centered principle in turn rewards the right kind of participation, the right kind of data production that works to optimize how EdgeRank and Google PageRank link with advertising systems to optimize and figure or produce particular versions of themselves. In this way, our participation online, as we all know now, is itself the raw material that becomes the bedrock for generating power and value through algorithms. And in a way, this is to say that as participatory subjects, we are threatened by our invisibility. That is to say that one of the ways algorithms maintain their strength is by encouraging users to see themselves as needing to add into the system for fear of being lost by that system. And this creates tangled relationships around this very core idea of participation, which is not only an element of our online lives, but clearly an element of our democratic cultures. In this way, social media uses our desire to be seen to shape a system of self-production that impacts our lives. I also want to highlight one other profound impact that algorithms through social media platforms are having on us, which is through the enclosure of public knowledge. And I won't dig into this in great detail, but only to say that as Google becomes increasingly the archive of the recorded publications produced in English, the ability to gather and use public knowledge increasingly operates through the machinations of corporate systems rather than state or government systems. I'll conclude this part by just saying that algorithms are coding machines that often only become visible to us when this call to act, or when they call us to act, or when they break down or fail to deliver anticipated results. And this creates both a demand for action and openings for media education to act. Michael and I are going to turn to some research that supports this in a moment. Michael, I pass it over to you.
Sure, and I'm aware that we're probably running up against some time limits. Michelle, do you want to indicate?
I think we have 5 minutes left, Michael, according to my count.
Yep.
Okay, great.
5 minutes, yep.
Okay, fabulous. Well, listen, this is a really great study. I suggest you have a look at it. It's the recent research study of media smarts in Canada, algorithmic awareness. And the way they did the research with 13 to 17-year-olds was by generating activity and working together a little bit, actually through some games, et cetera, to just refresh everybody on what algorithms are and how they work, right? So it's interesting. These are then responses from some of the young people. And I just want to really focus on some of the verbs there: concerned, frustrated, aware, skeptical. And then these adjectives, you know, the algorithms, what they've learned is weird, it's scary, it's unsettling, it's worrying, it's concerning, it's creepy, you know? So we can also recognize that, you know, young people are going to come quickly to an understanding of what issues they see there. As it says at the top, you know, content saturation, being lumped into categories, the way bias works, et cetera, and their inability to get inside and to make some change. I'm going to, you know, where it leads to in this research study is what young people are saying is needed, which is that everybody needs a greater awareness. There should be better transparency. These algorithms, you know, could be explained, and they certainly could. Protection, that there, you know, regulation and other such tools can be used, and that people should have control over data. This connects right back to the last talk, and I don't know if I'll get to it by the end of our talk, but civic data trusts, you know, like go in there and say, well, the university should actually take control of its data, even if that corporation runs away with it, but keep the local data, right, and use it locally. And then engagements, you know, young people say we should have a voice here. Next slide, please, sir. So the famous incident from over 5 years ago now of the, you know, somebody capturing this screen grab, 3 black teenagers, 3 white teenagers. This was the incident where it was revealed that, you know, there's this racist outcome depending on which words you put in. And so one group looks like inmates, and one looks like department store catalogs. And so Google said, well, wait a minute, you know, it's you that's racist, like you're the ones that plugged in that data. And so that it raises that interesting question: is the algorithm racist, or are the users? And we'll try to unwind that, whether or not we have time to today. But the other thing is this participation paradox. Like if you participate, you're tracked, packaged, and sold. But if you don't participate, you'll have little or no impact on how, you know, the algorithm evolves. And with the great big digital divides in this world, this is now, you know, there's a data divide, there's a data poverty. And so Data Sur, your organizations in the global south are tracking this and very engaged. And the last slide too, Stuart, please.
Okay, this is going to take us back to media education and response.
Oh no, it's you now. Yeah, okay.
Okay, so I'm going to go through these slides. One of the things Michael and I have been thinking a lot about is how key concepts in media education, in particular production, text, reception, and cultural life, afford roots into the critical analysis and engagement with algorithms and algorithmic power. And it seems to us that each of them provide a kind of detour through a critical examination of a number of different elements of algorithms' imprint on our social lives. And so what we've tried to do in these 2 slides is locate how, for instance, under production, social media and platform economies of Facebook, Amazon, Apple, Microsoft, and Google, or FAMGA, as is sometimes said, are themselves a key kind of site where the concept of production in media education finds a focus. I've highlighted a number of different kinds of thematics where it seems the work of media education has particular value in unpacking and working through the meaning of algorithms in our collective lives and in the lives of young people. You see those categories or elements here. I want to note, for instance, a desire and pornification, which is really about sexual identity in young people's lives, where algorithms have played such a profound role in changing the scripting of sexuality that's part of young people's lives today. I'll go on to note that in areas of reception and in cultural life, likewise, the engagement with the challenges that algorithms pose for us seem to be something that is vital for us to take up. And in fact, that media education has a tradition of resources to assist with this work. It's also fair to say, as Michael is going to highlight, that there are ongoing forms of resistance that young people and others are offering as exemplars of ways to challenge the role of algorithms in our lives. So I'll pass on there, and then just by way of quick conclusion, finish with a slide on what we think of as challenges algorithms open up for media literacy education that are yet to be resolved. So Michael?
Well, one of the ways to resist is to sign off, so a lot of your friends probably are leaving one platform or another. They're saying to heck with it. That's number 8. But essentially, there's some which are going to engage policy, like where advocacy work, taking control of data, like actually civic data trusts and other things. These are political machinations. Then there's community groups doing things like taking data and reinterpreting it. So the data ethnography, the data counter mapping. Then there's also performative things like culture jamming. I can't explain these ones, I don't have the time. And flipping the technology in the McLuhan sense, flipping, turning it, and also just using it the way it's scripted to your own advantage, right? And that's something that Zeynep Tufekci's Twitter to Tear Gas explains really well, how, activists following the rules of engagement, which are usually not easy to find. That was a form of resistance too. So, thank you.
Okay, I'm going to wrap up, and thank you for your patience by just noting that it seems to us that algorithms open up at least 4 kinds of fascinating questions within media education. The first one I've listed as algorithms, digital ecologies, and infrastructures. And really what we're getting at here is that algorithms bring to media education significant debate on how we understand central metaphors in our field. This is really a struggle over the meaning of ecologies and literacies, and how we use these concepts to anchor the work of critical action and critical analysis in our field. I think there's more and more work that's coming out challenging and contesting the role of literacies as it aids us in thinking through and critically responding to algorithms. So that's one, about the core epistemologies in our field, given the new ontological context of media that we're living through. Second is the sense that algorithms and their failure in everyday life is something that many users, including young people, as Michael pointed to, point out as the moment when algorithms become most visible to us. In other words, their opaqueness is overcome through their failure. And I want to note that because I think that that resonates with the research of people like Tena Bucher, other research that's come out recently that makes clear that it's in the other one I wanted to mention is the work Everyday Data Cultures by Kath Elbury and folks from Australia, all of which brings attention to the moments within everyday life where the work of media education would find opportunity to begin. Openness, from disappointment, from frustration, from rejection. Third, that algorithms raise and the way in which they rewire our relationship with participation in social networks, in social relationships that are woven together through online platforms. They raise real questions about how we understand the meaning of agency versus poiesis in media education. Agency is the ability to act. Poiesis is the ability to create something new that didn't exist before. And they orient different questions about what's needed to respond to the challenge of algorithms. Last, I want to say that algorithms in their conjunction with the work of states and governments, as well as corporations today, raise for media education questions about how the field contests the work of states and policy actors. And I think this is a particularly germane set of questions, given that our field of media education is often understood as a civic practice, a practice located in the institutions of school and other non-political institutions in everyday life, art galleries and so on. And it seems to me that what algorithms bring to those spaces is a need to address more explicitly relations beyond corporate relations to include state and regulatory questions in a way that neoliberalism and recent histories have in some ways blinded us to. So I think these are fascinating ways in which algorithms alters the challenges our field faces. And on that, we thank you so much for your time and your attention and the extra time that Michelle allowed us.
Yeah, so we'll go straight to, if you could stop sharing.
You bet.
And then we'll go straight to Renee, and we can go over a little bit with the break time for some more questions. So, but go, take it away, Renee.
I am thrilled to be on this panel because these ideas are just so full and illustrate what I'm going to be talking about. So I took a dive and wrote an article. Belina has a new book coming out. And really this talk is excerpted in some ways from the article I have in her book. Her book is oriented toward media literacy and social justice. And I am sort of toward the end of the book where I wrote a chapter called Reconceptualizing Media Literacy for the Mid-21st Century, a Vision of Media and Society 2022 to 2040. So I don't know that I'll be around then, but I'm giving it my best shot right now in terms of imagining. And we need our imaginations because the future is moving so rapidly toward us and we have to deal. So I'd like to start with 3 questions. We're not going to answer them. I'm only going to mention them. They came up in some news stories this week. 1, is AI, artificial intelligence, sentient? Does it have feelings? Can it learn on its own? You may have seen this question coming up from a Google researcher. 2, what type of new programs are being developed for children in the metaverse, the virtual world being developed by Mark Zuckerberg's Meta company? And 3, if you've seen the film, what is the meaning of the film Everything Everywhere All at Once? And how does it relate to quantum physics? We may ponder these questions as we ask an overarching question. Who can foretell the trajectory of a new technology? What change will a new technology engender? So Neil Postman, who was a wonderful media theorist, called technological evolution a Faustian bargain, by which he meant a pact where something of supreme moral importance is traded for some worldly benefit, such as knowledge, power, or riches. Everything had a trade-off. He doubted that the world had the technological maturity to find the benefits in the technology and escape the harm built within it. And we are seeing this now. If we went back to, let's say, the early days of the internet or even the days of early social media, we would see all the promise that was promised. And we understand now that there are unanticipated consequences of our use of these tools, even though they seem to be able to unite us and give us positive outcomes. Years ago, Marshall McLuhan said, "The medium is the message." You've probably heard that phrase. And in a sense, it's not just the content that shapes us, but it is the tools themselves and how those tools now program our lives and determine our behavior over time. In the 20th century, 22 years ago already, media literacy was developed as a protection against media that would modify our political, economic, and social behavior. Media literacy was going to teach us how to guard the public good and keep our individual behavior more informed. We would not be the dupe of advertisers. We would be able to become critical viewers and have some perspective on media, some judgment. Print was one of the ways that we saw to relay a message, then of course television. And there was always a sort of sense in the early media literacy of moral guidance. You saw from the speech last night, you know, how parents ought to behave with their children in the media. That was a very important kind of 20th century approach. So, and I was thinking back in days like that where there was something like subliminal advertising, where if you went to a movie, especially one at a drive-in, which don't exist anymore, I don't think, but they did for a while during the pandemic, you would then see something that says, buy Coca-Cola, buy Coca-Cola, buy Coca-Cola, and it would flash. And then there would be a whole rush to the stand where Coca-Cola was sold. So we were forewarned about these things. Media manipulation and media literacy was a defense. So where are we now? Certainly television is superseded, and it's almost passé, even though, you know, still exists. And certain terms we never heard of before, and Stuart and Michael and everyone were talking about, you know, new conceptualizations, new terminologies. Terms like viral and meme and likes and algorithms have taken their place in the lexicon of media literacy. And while gaming was popular toward the end of the 20th century, the idea of gamification is new. It's new in learning, and it's a new way of thinking about learning. And so, and also the issue of reality. What is reality? Is it virtual reality or augmented reality or artificial intelligence driven? Or is it a life space called the metaverse from which we never have to exit, unless perhaps to serve our bodily functions, which still exist in IRL? I mean, the fact that we have a term IRL in real life and we use it means that there's another alternative life that we've, you know, been paying a lot of attention to. We and our machines have a new relationship as well. Ray Kurzweil, whose work I like a lot, you know, wrote about the age of intelligent machines and the age of spiritual machines. And he was the one who coined the concept of the singularity, in which our machines will outpace our intelligence, that our, in effect, our machines will become smarter than we are. And they will achieve capacities that will be more than what humans can do. And one of the things I thought about in terms of JD and Michelle's presentation was the rationale for using those data gathering tools is that any faculty member trying to gather all those tools, it would be impossible, right? And I agree that that's the Faustian bargain. It gives us a ton of information as faculties. At the same time, it is an imposition that I know you're going to find out more about on students. And we also have to think about robotics. What will human life be if robots take care of many functions? This is happening. Driverless cars, drones, spaceships, interplanetary travel. Are billionaires talking about going to Mars or flying up, you know, for a little quick jaunt in space? What does this have to do with media literacy? I think plenty. I think this kind of reimagining and just building an alternative, it all sounds like science fiction. And science fiction, I think, is something that's been left out of media literacy to our, I think to our sorrow in some ways, because the people who wrote those books and who continue to write them are often far ahead of the curve in terms of understanding some of the realities, such as whether our robots will suddenly become our friends. and our companions in some of the newest books that have been written. So what media and messages then become essential when we talk to machines, which we do all the time? You know, we push a button and we get a message, and then we push another button, we get another message. So in the 20th century, there were futurists who, one in particular named Alvin Toffler. Toffler coined the term future shock. He wrote a book, it was about 1970, in which he said, you know, things are changing so fast that we're all in a kind of shock, that he said there is a shattering stress and disorientation that people are feeling. And he referred a lot to the new media that were starting to emerge. But I would argue today that we are beyond this paralysis that he describes. We can't afford the paralysis. We have realities that must be faced, and things like altering sensory perception in alternate realities, scientific theories about living in a place, I put that in quotes, like the metaverse. Our human machine connections, our interdependencies and dependencies on machines require confrontation. I think we can't await and be in shock. There is a level of decision-making on which much of the fate of the human species, and dare I say the democratic experiment, depends. So our media play a very important role in these calculations. We can mine data sets for patterns of understanding. We can look at stages of innovation, and we can imagine, we have to imagine the possible, as futurists say, imagine the possible, assess the probable, and decide on the preferable. So there are choices to be made. And certainly if we look at climate change and other global issues, these choices have to be made very, very soon. So we've never quite encountered these technological waters in quite this way. In my article, I write of several different contemporary theorists whose work I recommend be included in media literacy, but I'll just pick one for now. And some of you may know his work. His name is Yuval Noah Harari. He is a public intellectual. He's Israeli. He's on YouTube all over the place. You'll be able to find him in many, many dialogues. He wrote the book Sapiens, Homo Deus, another of his books, and 21 Lessons for the 21st Century. And what he says is, we are moving in a way where Homo sapiens, man, human, as knower, becomes Homo Deus, man, becoming God. And this has many different facts that he uses to explain this. Of course, it's a metaphor, but we are, I'm trying to move down a little bit down. He says that our quest for immortality, for example, is going to be one of the 21st century's biggest quests. And I've been looking at issues of longevity for a different project entirely that I'm working on. And we're already at the point where a child of 5, born today and is 5, will have the potentiality of 100-year life. 100-year life on a wide expectation. Of course, that is more in the more privileged, so to speak, societies. But nevertheless, the expansion of our lives, our non-human companions, our artificial intelligence, our genetic engineering, etc., changes our whole perspective on what are our media and who are we talking to and how. So what I want to say is the canons of media literacy, I think, do need refresh. And the 2 panels before my talk certainly indicate a very broad opening into the 21st century issues. These issues did not exist, before in this way. What I do in the article is I find a couple of places that I call centers of invention that I think that we should engage with more in media literacy studies. One of these is the MIT Media Lab. We kind of go in and out of relationship with them, but they are certainly doing some very interesting work. The Arizona State University School of the Future of Innovation in Society is dealing with a lot of interdisciplinary research that I think media literacy, which is intrinsically interdisciplinary, could benefit from their overviews. ASU also has a Center for Science and the Imagination, which looks at all kinds of media platforms. And there's a new lab at the University of Chicago, which is a place I went to for my master's, but it's a game lab, very hugely funded, which looks at, this is their language, digital fabrication, virtual reality, geographic information systems, data visualizations, and other cutting edge technologies to develop games that produce social impact. So I do believe that media literacy can be a field that unifies us across disciplines, asks cultural questions, speaks to the world we live in and will be living in, the one that our children are going to inherit. So there's no time to waste. Media literacy cannot be a sort of supplement or a sideline or something that the English teacher does once a week in class or the social studies teacher occasionally. I think it needs its own global think tank for research and policy on mediated worldwide communications and education based on the coming media transformations over the next decade. But if there's one thing I want to leave you with, it's this. I believe that the time is now for a convening, I call it a convening, of the global media literacy community for a new rethinking, because we can't do it in an hour or an hour and a half. Just deconstructing the prior presentation, could take hours. I think we need a convening. In 1992, the Aspen Institute did convene at a center called the WYE, the Y Center, which actually is a good name, the Y Center, WHY if it were, where key media literacy concepts were agreed upon. And I can imagine, and I highly urge, that somewhere between maybe now and 2024, we have a gathering like that, which is not just a day or two, maybe it's a week. I don't know. I haven't, but it's a place where we engage, hopefully in person, on a worldwide level with people from all over the world, which IC4ML is certainly starting and including. And I think that can create a paradigm shift for us and an integration that is necessary for us to understand. I think the media production industry has to be invited. I believe Hollywood needs to be there. That's the Hollywood question that I asked you. I mean, I just watched that film the other day and I thought, they're reading some things. They're not making, I didn't think it was a great movie, but they're trying to be au courant and use certain scientific principles. It's kind of interesting. Let's invite them too. I see universities in the picture, lots of PhD researchers to ask fundamental questions for this century and beyond. So I started out with 3 questions. Is AI sentient? What kind of children's programming should be in the metaverse? And what does everything all at once have to do with quantum physics? I'm not going to answer these questions. But what I am going to do in a kind of Talmudic fashion is I am going to answer a question with another question. So I'm going to just ask you a bunch of questions. Again, I'm not daring to answer them now. But what are media? What are they? Are they still the same things we always thought about? What is literacy? What are the criteria? Which new models of redefinition of media literacy are most robust? What research agenda should be prioritized now? What new epistemologies will emerge? What ethical dilemmas do the new media pose? What will schooling look like over the next 2 decades? And how can the new media literacy embody new modes of educational theory and practice? With whom will alliances be made to determine new directions, global representation, and equity? How can media become agents for social justice, affect our government, enhance our democracy, and serve the public good? These questions and so many more can form the basis of our convening. Refreshing ourselves for this time of the technium, a term coined by Kevin Kelly, who's the former editor of Wired magazine, is now, he says in one of his wonderful books of about 10 years ago, that the technium includes all of the technologies together. Like we are using this part of the technium right now to talk to each other in far-flung places. So we have to reconceptualize the field. Maybe it will become more systematic, maybe it will be more integrated, but I want us to think. We started by honoring Marilee Rowe, who began by worries about radio. And I want us to think about the media literacy community that comes after us. 30 years ago, which was when the Y conference was, it's now 30 years hence. And 60 years from now, maybe 2082, right? What will it be? What will this field be? The pioneers behind us and those right now, us and the younger people who are finishing their PhDs now and really moving out into the world of their prime research and participation. You are all bringing vision and humanity and new solutions and new ethical dilemmas and new ways for us to talk to each other. So the past, they were pioneers, and I look forward to the future of our field.
Thank you, Renee.
That's it. Thank you.
We are over our time in the room. I don't see anybody else coming in to set up. I think we must have somebody go. Otherwise, last thoughts, or before you have to go somewhere, anybody you can go. People who have to go on move, so move. But if you want to say anything, go ahead.
We out in cyberspace have to respect the real life needs of the folks that are actually at the conference.
Yeah, bathroom, run for the bathroom. We all came
I'm
from
grateful
lunch.
that, that folks came and paid attention, stayed with us through that. Thank you, Renee, for your comments.
Thank you,
end, they're
Michael,
very
and JD
wide-ranging,
and Stuart, everybody.
And Michelle and JD, the presentation, the
And
research.
Michelle, thank you.
Heading in
I
a
thought
really
it was a
interesting
good-
direction.
We covered a lot of ground. It was
Yes,
cool.
it
Hope
was-
to stay in touch.
A lot of ground.
Yeah.
But it only makes me feel stronger that we need to really deconstruct, like some of the people you were referring to in your talks were not authors I've read, for example, and maybe some of the people or places I'm referring in my talks. To pool this and see the scope and ask the questions and at least come to some preliminary, unifiers, what would be the word be? Definitions of terms, attempts.
I love your
Michael, I
idea.
hope you feel better soon.
As do I. And Renee, I have to say, I really love your idea of a call for a new Aspen. I think that's really important actually right now. And I think that's the kind of forum. We'll be hosting a global media education summit in Vancouver in March.
Really?
Yep, of
Sen,
23,
would you
the Global Media Education.
send me something?
I'm sorry.
Or I'll look, I'll keep
I
looking.
absolutely will. We will, I will, let me,
Yes, definitely through our, we'll support in promoting it, so get it to us.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Do you know the dates, Stuart, off the top?
March 2nd to 4th.
Fantastic. Plus
Uh,
a good excuse to come to Vancouver.
Exactly. And so let me, I'm just going to pop this in the, there we are, in the chat, and folks can access it at least in this way.
Yeah, but we'll send it. I mean, Karen and Belina, through the
Yes.
IC4ML.
Yes, of course.
We'll get
Yeah.
that circulating. No problem.
That would be
Absolutely.
fantastic.
The deadline for participation is at the end of the summer, right?
That's
Stuart?
right. That's right, Mike.
Oh.
So
September 9th or 10th or something like that. So
lots
Wonderful.
of,
We're just talking until the next people show up.
Well, just I see it's a center for research,
I
and
could also.
that's what I think we need too. We need but
yeah.
like the winners of, I was one of the judges for the award. And there were so many people from all over the world, and that was just
Okay, so you
immensely
yeah.
important. Yeah.
Okay. You better
Great.
get
Thank you.
off this.
yeah, we'll let the next.
Thank you all. Really great to meet you.
Thank you. Lovely to
Yeah.
meet you. Hope to
Thanks
see
a
you.
lot. Nice to meet you all.
Thank you, Michelle, for moderating.
Anytime.